The dust of Aethel never truly left him, a phantom grit in his lungs, a ghostly film on his skin. Kalen Vance remembered the sky burning green, not with fire, but with life, a virulent, explosive efflorescence that had consumed a world in 72 hours. They had called it the Bloomfall, a gentle, almost poetic name for a planetary extinction event that had erased his wife, his daughter, and 8 million other souls under a tide of ravenous, sentient flora. The Galactic Concordance, the benevolent coalition of elder species who had gifted humanity the flawed terraforming technology, had sent their condolences in a transmission that shimmered with feigned sorrow, calling it a tragic, unforeseeable ecological cascade. They offered aid, reparations, a seat at their table, a smaller chair, of course, suitable for a species that had just demonstrated its profound incompetence. But Kalen knew the truth. He had been a xenobotanist on Aethel, one of the lead scientists tasked with integrating the Concordance's biocode into the planet's nascent ecosystem. In the final, screaming moments of the colony, as the air thickened with pollen that could think and vines that constricted with methodical intelligence, he had managed to secure a single, uncorrupted data shard from the primary reactor core, a shard containing the original, elegant, and utterly malicious code the Concordance had provided. It wasn't flawed, it was perfect. The cascade wasn't an accident, it was an assassination. The code was a weapon, a genetic kill switch designed to trigger a runaway Malthusian catastrophe the moment a human colony reached a specific population and energy output threshold. Humanity hadn't failed. They had succeeded too well, too quickly. And the quiet, paternalistic shepherds of the galaxy had decided to prune a branch before it grew strong enough to challenge the trunk. For 10 years, Kalen had done nothing. He lived in a cramped orbital habitat, clinging to the shadowed side of Titan, the data shard locked in a cryostasis box that hummed a constant, mocking lullaby of his failure. Grief was a gravity well. It had crushed his anger into a diamond-hard point of apathy he couldn't escape. He worked nutrient-paced reclamation, his brilliant mind dissolving in the monotonous hum of filtration systems, while humanity accepted the Concordance's narrative, bowed its head, and mourned its own supposed hubris. The galaxy moved on. Humanity did not. Then she came. Her name was Anya Sharma, and she moved with the quiet lethality of a vacuum blade. She found him in the gray twilight of the habitat's observation dome, the rings of Saturn a cold, indifferent backdrop. She didn't look like a soldier or a spook from the Sol Directorate's infamous Section 7. She looked like a professor, her dark hair streaked with silver, her eyes holding the patient weariness of someone who had read too many sad histories. She didn't threaten him. She didn't demand the shard he didn't know she knew about. She simply sat beside him, the silence stretching between them until it became a tangible presence. "The flowers on Aethel," she began, her voice low and steady. "The first ones to bloom, the dawn lilies. The Concordance archives say they were a pale white, a symbol of peace. Is that what you remember, Dr. Vance?" Kalen didn't turn, his gaze fixed on the slow dance of ice and rock. "I remember they were the color of bone," he said, the words tasting like ash. "And they didn't have a scent. They had a frequency. It made your teeth ache just before the vines broke through the floor." Sharma nodded slowly. "Our official report, based on Concordance telemetry, omit that detail. They also omit the fact that the genetic markers in the Bloomfall flora were not a mutation of the introduced biome, but a perfect match for species cataloged in the Concordance's own restricted archives. A species classified as a planetary denial asset. We've suspected for a decade. We've just never had the source code to prove it." He finally looked at her, his eyes hollowed out by memory. "Prove it to whom to them you think they'll confess if you show them their own work." A flicker of something hard and cold entered her gaze. "No," she said. "We need to prove it to ourselves." She slid a wafer-thin datapad onto the bench between them. An image resolved on its surface a ship, but it was unlike any vessel humanity had ever built. It was a dark, brutalist fusion of metal and biotechnology, its hull plated with something that looked like obsidian chitin, its lines angular and aggressive. It was less a machine and more a creature, a predator waiting to be unleashed. "For 10 years we've mourned," Sharma continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "We've accepted their pity. We've scaled back our colonization efforts. We've attended their summits and politely debated the philosophical implications of our own tragic failure. But in the dark, in the silent docks of the Kuiper Belt and the deep gravity wells of rogue planets, we haven't been mourning. We've been building. We've been learning. We took their biology, their physics, their condescending lessons, and we twisted them into something they will never see coming." She tapped the screen, and the ship's designation appeared below the image, SDS Retribution. It's the flagship of the Scythe fleet, a fleet of 50 biotitans, each one grown, not assembled. Their neural networks are based on cetacean brain structures, capable of intuitive tactical leaps that would short out any traditional AI. Their armor is a bioceramic lattice that can regenerate mid-conflict. Their main weapon is a gravity lance, a technology the Concordance believes is 50 years beyond our grasp. They think we are a species of poets and engineers. They have forgotten we are also a species of soldiers and monsters. Kalen felt a tremor in his chest, the first stirrings of a feeling he thought had died on Aethel. It was cold and sharp, and it tasted like iron. "Why tell me this? Why show me this?" he asked. "Because the Directorate is fractured," Sharma admitted, her professional mask cracking for just a moment to reveal the zealot beneath. "There are factions that still believe in diplomacy, that fear a war with the Concordance would be suicide. They call us warmongers. They demand irrefutable proof before they will sanction a first strike, before they will unlock the Scythe fleet's full operational command. Your data shard is that proof. It's the key that turns a rogue military project into humanity's righteous sword." She leaned closer, her eyes locking onto his. "They are preparing to make their final move in 1 month. At the Galactic Summit on Cygnus X1, they will propose the Aethel Accords. It's a treaty offering humanity full protectorate status. They will absorb our colonies, manage our resources, guide our development for our own safety. They will put a leash on us, and the appeasement faction in the Directorate is desperate enough to sign it. They will sell our future for a facade of security. They will finish the job they started with the Bloomfall." The apathy in Kalen's soul cracked, and through the fissure, a decade of buried rage began to boil. He saw his wife, Lena, her hands buried in the rich red soil of their new world. He saw his daughter, Maya, chasing iridescent butterflies that had been born in a lab on Earth. He saw the bone-white flowers turning their heads to track them as they played. And he felt the low, thrumming hum that had preceded the end of everything. He had survived, but he had not been living. He had been a ghost, haunting the memory of a world that had been murdered. Anya Sharma was offering him something he hadn't realized he craved more than peace, more than forgetfulness. She was offering him a purpose. He stood up, his body aching with a sudden, renewed sense of weight and meaning. He looked from the cold, Beautiful rings of Saturn to the cold. Beautiful killer sitting beside him. "The shard is keyed to my biometric signature," he said, his voice raw. "It won't decrypt without me." A slow, dangerous smile touched Sharma's lips. "We were counting on that, Dr. Vance." He walked back to his small, sterile apartment, the hum of the cryo box now sounding like a war drum. He packed no clothes, no mementos. There was nothing left to pack. He simply lifted the heavy, cold box, its surface frosted with the ice of his long winter of grief. When he returned to the observation dome, a private transport was already docked. Its airlock hissed open, waiting for him. Sharma stood by the entrance, her expression unreadable. As he stepped aboard, the ship's interior was dark, militaristic, and smelled of ozone and recycled air. Sharma led him to a viewport as the ship silently disengaged from the habitat and turned its nose toward the outer darkness. "There's something you should know," she said, as the vast, empty space between the planets swallowed them. "The name of the flagship. Retribution is its public designation, a name for the politicians, a name that suggests a response to an attack." She paused, letting the silence hang in the sterile air of the cockpit. "But the crew, the men and women who have spent a decade in the dark, building our vengeance piece by piece. They call it by its true name, a name to remind them not of what we are fighting back against, but who we are fighting for." The ship accelerated, a silent blade cutting through the void. Sharma looked at him, her eyes reflecting the distant, pinprick light of Sol. "They call it the Aethel's ghost." And in that moment, Kalen Vance knew the dust would never leave him, not because he was haunted, but because he had finally become the haunting. The cold rage in his heart was no longer a point of pain. It was a star, ready to go supernova. The journey to the Kuiper Belt had begun, and with it, the long-delayed promise of a harvest the galaxy was not prepared to reap. The journey was a study in compressed silence. The ship, a null signature courier named the Whisper, was a ghost in the machine of the Sol system, its hull coated in radar-absorbent polymers and its heat signature managed by a cascading system of cryogenic baffles. It was a vessel designed not to exist. A perfect conveyance for a man who had felt like a phantom for a decade. Anya Sharma was a creature of this environment, her movements economical, her words precise and infrequent. She explained the protocols and the mission parameters with the dispassionate clarity of a machine reading a diagnostic. Kalen was no longer a civilian, he was an asset, a component in a vast and terrible engine he was only now beginning to comprehend. He spent the transit staring out at the receding light of the sun, a pale, distant god that could no longer warm him. The rage Sharma had uncorked was not a fire, it was a glacier, cold, immense, and moving with an unstoppable, grinding force. He didn't feel hatred in hot flashes, but as a deep, structural certainty that had settled into his bones. The apathy had been a shell, and now that it was cracked, he found the man underneath was someone he no longer recognized, a creature forged in the green fire of Aethel's death, and he was thirsty for an accounting. Their destination was not a base or a station, but a scar. In the chaotic, rubble-strewn expanse of the Kuiper Belt, they approached a rogue planetoid, a lump of ice and rock cataloged only as XB937. But as the Whisper drew closer, Kalen saw that one side of the planetoid was not natural. It was a perfectly flat, black, non-reflective circle several kilometers in diameter, a wound in the rock that drank the faint starlight and gave nothing back. Sharma called it the Umbra. As they slipped through the field, which Kalen now realized was a stealth generator of impossible scale. The planetoid surface shimmered, and a section of the darkness dilated like an iris. They flew into the heart of the rock, into a cavern so vast it had its own weather, a cold, metallic mist that clung to the ship's hull. And there, suspended in the silent, colossal dark, was the Scythe fleet. The datapad image had been a sterile representation, a shadow of the truth. Seeing them in person stole the air from Kalen's lungs. They were not ships. They were beasts. 50 of them, hanging in the void like a pod of leviathan sleeping in the deep. Their chitinous armor was not uniform black, but swirled with iridescent patterns, like oil on water, shifting and changing with some unseen inner metabolic process. Veins of soft, bioluminescent light, the color of dying embers, pulsed in slow, rhythmic waves beneath their hides. There was no clean hum of machinery, no thrum of fusion cores. There was only a profound, subvocal vibration that resonated in Kalen's teeth and sternum, the wet, organic thrum of 1,000 colossal hearts beating in unison. At the center of the formation, dwarfing all others, was the flagship, Aethel's ghost. Its prow was split, like the mandibles of some nightmare insect, and between them pulsed a core of contained energy that warped the space around it. A miniature, captured singularity. It was beautiful, and it was obscene. A monument to a grief so profound it had chosen to become a predator. "We reverse-engineered the Concordance's terraforming tech," Sharma said, her voice filled with a chilling reverence as she stood beside him at the viewport. "They gave us the tools to create life. We perfected them to create death. Each biotitan is gestated in a nutrient womb, its genetic code spliced with the most resilient life forms we could find: deep-sea extremophiles, tardigrades, the regenerative tissues of certain cephalopods. Its nervous system is an organic quantum computer. They don't process commands, they feel them. They don't execute tactics, they hunt." They docked within a vast, brutalist structure carved into the cavern wall. The air was cold and smelled of iron and amniotic fluid, and the personnel who met them moved with the disciplined silence of a priesthood, their faces grim, their eyes burning with the same focused intensity Kalen had seen in Sharma. They were the acolytes of a new and terrible faith, and their god was vengeance. He was led to the command center, a cavernous space overlooking the slumbering fleet. A man stood before the immense viewport, his back to them. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his immaculate black uniform a stark contrast to the raw, living metal and rock around him. When he turned, Kalen saw a face that was a roadmap of forgotten wars. A web of faint scars covered the left side of his face. His left eye was a softly glowing silver optic that whirred almost silently as it focused on Kalen. "Admiral Valerius Thorn," the man said, his voice a low gravel, like grinding stone. He didn't offer a hand. "Dr. Vance, Section Chief Sharma has a great deal of faith in you. She believes you carry our absolution in that box." Thorn's gaze was heavy, analytical. "I'm less interested in absolution than I am in ammunition. Grief is a luxury. Doctor, we trade in focused rage here. Are you a tourist in your own tragedy, or are you ready to burn down the museum?" The question was a challenge. A blade laid against his throat. "The people who built this fleet," Kalen replied, his voice steady. "They built it out of grief. They just hammered it into a sharper shape. I'm ready to provide the edge." A flicker of something that might have been approval crossed Thorn's face. "Good," he rumbled. "Then let's see the Concordance's last will and testament." The decryption took place in a sterile, isolated chamber known as the Locus. It was less a computer lab and more a surgical theater. Kalen placed the cryobox onto a central dais, and as its seals hissed open, a plume of vapor swirled around the data shard, a perfect, crystalline teardrop that seemed to pulse with a faint inner light. He placed his hand on the biometric scanner, and the Locus came alive. Holographic displays bloomed around him, not with lines of code, but with swirling, chaotic patterns of light and sound. The shard didn't just contain data, it contained the sensory logs of the Aethel network, a digital ghost of the entire colony. To decrypt it, he had to immerse himself in its final moments. He felt the sun on his skin, smelled the rich soil. He heard Maya's laughter, a sound that lanced through him with a pain so pure it was almost ecstasy. Then came the hum, the low, tooth-aching frequency of the bone-white flowers. The displays around him swirled into a vortex of screaming green and constricting vines. He was back in his lab, the emergency sirens wailing, the building groaning under the pressure of the bloomfall. The last message from Lena cut short by a sound he had spent 10 years trying to forget. But this time, the grief didn't drown him. It was a current, and he rode it, diving deeper into the data stream, past the colony's death rattle, into the pristine, malicious code that lay at its heart. The code unfolded, and with it, the truth, in all its banal, administrative horror. He saw concordance communiques, encrypted messages between officials with names like Arbiter Vex and Curator Jin. They discussed Project Silent Spring with the detached language of planetary gardeners, debating population thresholds and optimal trigger times. They called humanity a virulent but promising species that required aggressive pruning to maintain galactic ecological balance. One message from Vex himself was time-stamped the day Aethel fell. The cascade is performing to spec. The specimen exhibits the expected panicked response, a tragic but necessary lesson in humility. Send the standard condolence package. It wasn't just murder. It was pest control. It was condescension written in the blood of 8 million people. When the final decryption key slotted into place, the primary file unlocked, its name a final, sickening twist of the knife. Aethel Terraforming Final Report. Successful decommissioning. The holographic displays coalesced into a single, stable data packet. The absolution. The ammunition. He stumbled back from the dais, breathing heavily, sweat stinging his eyes. The rage was no longer a glacier. It was a white-hot star in his chest, burning away the last vestiges of the man he had been. He was no longer just a survivor. He was a witness. Thorn and Sharma were waiting for him outside. They didn't need to ask. They saw it in his eyes. "Transmit it," Kalen said, his voice a rasp. "Transmit it to every ship in this fleet. Let them see what they're fighting for." Thorn nodded once, a gesture of grim finality, and turned to an aide. "Signal the fleet. Red Gamma authorization. Awaken the ghosts." As the data streamed across the cavern, change came over the slumbering bio-titans. The gentle and bear-like pulses of light in their veins brightened, turning a furious blood red. The subvocal hum rose in pitch, becoming a low, resonant growl that vibrated through the very rock of the planetoid. It was the sound of a predator stirring from a long sleep, catching the scent of its prey. Sharma led Kalen back to the command center's viewport. Every bio-titan has a central consciousness, a pilot prime, she explained, her voice barely audible over the rising thrum. An amalgamation of veteran minds, echoes of soldiers who volunteered their neural patterns before death, all woven into the ship's organic matrix. They are not just machines, they are tombs. They are memories given flesh and armor. Kalen stared at the flagship, at the Aethel's ghost, its crimson lights now pulsing with a fierce, predatory rhythm. He could almost feel its awareness, a vast and ancient sorrow, now honed to a razor's edge. He thought of his work, his life's passion, twisting the helix of life to create, to nurture. The Concordance had used that science to erase his world. Now, standing in the heart of humanity's secret arsenal, a new, terrible thought bloomed in his mind, a purpose that went beyond simply providing the proof. He turned to Thorn, who was watching the fleet awaken with a grim patriarch's pride. "Admiral," Kalen said, his voice ringing with a newfound authority, "you've weaponized life to build your ships. The Concordance weaponized life to destroy my world." He pointed a trembling finger at the viewport, at the awakened beasts of the Scythe fleet. "Let me do the same, and the data shard doesn't just contain their guilt. It contains the source code for the Bloomfall. Let me turn their garden into a plague. Let me give your soldiers a weapon that doesn't just kill their bodies, but devours their worlds." Admiral Thorn's silver optic whirred as it focused on him, and for the first time, the stone-faced commander smiled. It was not a pleasant sight. It was the baring of teeth. "Dr. Vance," and he said, the growl of the fleet his orchestra, "welcome to the war." Below them, the mandibles of the Aethel's ghost slowly opened, revealing the gravity lance at its heart. It began to spin, gathering the darkness around it, a promise of a reckoning that had been 10 years deferred. The ghosts were awake, and they were hungry. The Umbra ceased to be a sanctuary and became a forge. The awakening of the Scythe fleet transformed the silent, hollowed-out planetoid into a hive of furious activity. The low, organic thrum of the Bio-Titans was now a constant, palpable presence, a battle hymn sung in a key just below the threshold of human hearing. It was the sound of impending violence, and Kalen found it strangely comforting. He was given a laboratory, a sealed biosphere carved deep into the rock, a place of sterile light and humming machinery that felt more like home than any habitat he'd lived in for the past decade. It was here, surrounded by gene sequencers, viral culture vats, and holographic protein folders, that he began his work. He was no longer Dr. Vance, the grieving xenobotanist. He was becoming something else, something harder and more elemental, defined not by what he had lost, but by what he intended to create. He called his creation Eater of Eden. It was a poetic, almost biblical name for a thing of calculated, biological horror. He took the Concordance's silent spring code, the elegant, malicious sequence that had turned Aethel into a floral graveyard, and he began to twist it. He didn't want to simply replicate the Bloomfall. That was their weapon, their signature. He wanted to pervert it, to turn their own artistry against them, to make it not just lethal, but symbolic. The original code was designed to create a hyper-aggressive, dominant floral species. Kalen's modifications introduced a fungal component, a parasitic mycorrhizal network that would lie dormant within the floral host. The flowers would bloom, beautiful and deceptively benign, seeding themselves across a target world. They would be irresistible to the native fauna, their pollen a potent neuroattractant. But as the floral ecosystem established itself, the hidden fungal agent would awaken. It wouldn't kill the plants. It would hijack them. It would dissolve chlorophyll, turning verdant landscapes a sickly, necrotic gray. It would warp the cellular structure of the flowers, twisting their petals into jagged, thorn-like spurs and causing them to secrete a corrosive, enzymatic nectar that could dissolve organic tissue and even etch metal. It was a weapon that didn't just kill a world, boy, but mocked it first, turning its beauty into a festering wound before cauterizing it with a slow, gray death. It was a planetary-scale insult. Anya Sharma became his shadow, his liaison to the military machine, and his confessor. She would watch him for hours, her expression a mixture of awe and apprehension, as he manipulated holographic gene spirals, his hands dancing in the light as he wove his tapestry of decay. "You're not just building a weapon, Kalen," she said one cycle, her voice a low murmur in the quiet of the lab. "You're writing a new scripture." He didn't look up from his work. "They made my daughter's grave out of flour," he replied, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "I'm just returning the sentiment on a galactic scale." The target was chosen by Admiral Thorne himself. It wasn't a military installation or a major industrial hub. It was a world called Xylos. The Concordance referred to it as a preserve world, a jewel of the inner sectors, a planet whose entire surface was a meticulously cultivated garden. It was home to the Lumina, a species of silicon-based life forms who resembled animate, crystalline statues. They were philosophers and artists, the cultural heart of the Concordance, and their world was a testament to their belief in harmony and aesthetic perfection. Xylos had no standing army, no orbital defense grid to speak of. It was considered untouchable, a sacred space. Thorne chose it for that very reason. He didn't want to win a battle. He wanted to commit blasphemy. The plan was brutally simple. A single modified Bio-Titan, the SDS Harbinger, would make a stealth run to the Xylos system. It wouldn't engage in combat. It would deploy a payload of 1,000 seed pods, micro-drones containing the Eater of Eden spores, into the planet's upper atmosphere. The spores would be carried by the wind currents, settling into the fertile soil of the world-spanning garden like a fine, invisible dust. Then, the Harbinger would leave, and they would wait. The summit on Cygnus X1 was less than 2 weeks away. Thorne's timing was impeccable. He wanted the first reports of the Gray Blight on Xylos to reach the Concordance delegates just as they were preparing to patronizingly offer humanity a leash. He wanted to replace their arrogance with a cold, creeping dread. Kalen worked with a feverish intensity, refining the fungal agent, running thousands of simulations, ensuring its stability and virulence. He barely ate. He didn't sleep, sustaining himself on stimulants and the pure, uncut adrenaline of his purpose. He was hollowing himself out, pouring everything that was left of his soul into this plague. The night before the Harbinger was scheduled to depart, Thorne summoned him to the bridge of the Aethel's ghost. The flagship was alive with a quiet, menacing energy. The pilot prime's consciousness pulsed through the bulkheads, a vast and sorrowful intelligence that Kalen could feel pressing at the edges of his own mind. The Admiral stood before the main viewport, which currently displayed a tactical map of the Xylos system. "The seed pods are loaded," Thorne said without turning. "The weapon is primed. Your part in this is done, Doctor." "It's not a weapon," Kalen corrected him, stepping up beside the imposing figure. "It's a message." Thorne finally turned, his silver optic whirring as it focused on Kalen's gaunt face. "And what message is that?" "It says that nothing is sacred," Kalen whispered. "It says that there is no garden so beautiful that we cannot salt the earth. It says that the same hands that create can also desecrate. It's the first lesson they taught us on Aethel. I'm just ensuring it's a lesson they never forget." For a long moment, Thorne was silent, his gaze unreadable. Then he gave a curt nod. Section Chief Sharma believes you have a role to play beyond this lab. She argues that your expertise will be invaluable in analyzing the Concordance's response, in predicting their biological counter-strategies. She has requested that you be assigned to her Vanguard unit, a rapid response intelligence team that will operate from this ship. "You want a scientist on your bridge?" Kalen asked, surprised. "I want the man who weaponized a flower to be at my side when the galaxy begins to wilt," Thorne stated flatly. "I want you to see the fruits of your labor, Doctor. I want you to bear witness to the new scripture you've written." It wasn't a request. Kalen was no longer a free agent. He was part of the machine. A vital, terrible cog, but a cog nonetheless. He accepted. There was nothing left for him in the sterile silence of the lab. His creation was finished, and now he needed to watch it bloom. The Harbinger launched without ceremony, a sliver of darkness detaching from the larger shadow of the Umbra and vanishing into the void. Then, a tense, expectant quiet settled over the fleet. They were an arrow drawn back on a bowstring, waiting for the signal to fly. 3 days later, the signal came. The Harbinger had reached the Xylo system. Kalen, now installed at a biodata console on the bridge of the Aethel's Ghost, watched the telemetry with a clinical detachment he didn't feel. He saw the ship release its payload, a silent, glittering cloud of micro-drones that dispersed into the planet's iridescent atmosphere. Mission accomplished. The Harbinger turned and vanished back into the dark. And then they waited. The wait was a unique form of torture. For 6 days, the Scythe fleet hung in the silent darkness of the Kuiper Belt, a coiled serpent waiting to strike. Kalen monitored the faint, deep space signals coming from the Xylo system, looking for any sign, any anomaly. On the 7th day, it began. A faint, almost imperceptible shift in the planet's atmospheric composition, picked up by their most sensitive long-range sensors. A spike in airborne particulate matter that was not native to Xylos's biome. The spores were germinating. Kalen brought the data up on the main screen. He ran a spectral analysis, and a knot in his stomach tightened. The emergent biosignature was a perfect match for the floral component of Eater of Eden. The flowers were blooming on the crystal fields of Xylos. Thorne stood behind him, a monolith of silent anticipation. "Report," he commanded. "Phase 1 is successful," Kalen said, his voice a dry crackle. "The garden has been seeded." Over the next 48 hours, they watched from a distance of light years as a world began to die. Using hyperspace relays and cloaked observation drones, they received fragmented, low-resolution images. They saw the Lumina, the elegant crystal beings, moving through their gardens, tending to the new, exotic flowers that had appeared overnight. They were beautiful, Kalen had to admit. Deep crimson blossoms with petals like spun glass, a stark and lovely contrast to the crystalline flora of Xylos. The Lumina were fascinated, their philosophical text no doubt already composing odes to this mysterious new gift from the cosmos. They had no idea they were cultivating their own extinction. Then, on the 10th day, the second phase began. Kalen's sensors detected a massive, planet-wide surge of enzymatic proteins and fungal hyphae on the grainy visual feeds. The vibrant crimson of the new flowers began to fade, replaced by a dull, leprous gray. The images showed the Lumina recoiling from the blossoms, their crystalline forms beginning to show signs of corrosion where the flowers' newly toxic nectar had touched them. Panic began to ripple through the Concordance's public networks. Xylos was reporting an aggressive, unidentified blight. Their sacred world was sick, on the bridge of the Aethel's Ghost. The mood was grimly triumphant. They were specters at a funeral they had orchestrated. Kalen felt a cold, hollow satisfaction. He had created this. He had taken his pain and made it into a plague. He watched the gray tide spread across the visual feeds, a cancer consuming a paradise, and he thought of the bone-white flowers of Aethel. He had not just brought death to Xylos, he had brought a terrible, symmetrical poetry. As the Concordance scrambled its top xenobiologists, and horrified delegates at the Cygnus Summit watched their preserve world rot from the inside out, Admiral Thorne finally gave the order Kalen had been waiting 10 years to hear. He stepped to the center of the bridge, his voice ringing out with the finality of a death sentence. "Signal the entire fleet. All ships, prepare for a coordinated jump. Our destination, Cygnus X1. The time for whispers is over. It is time for the galaxy to hear a scream." The 50 bio-titans of the Scythe fleet, their hulls now glowing with a malevolent, arterial light, began to move. Their mandible prows opened, and the gravity lances within began to spin, tearing holes in the fabric of space-time. The ghosts were no longer just awake. They were going to war. The jump to Cygnus X1 was not a journey. It was a violation. Traditional FTL drives bent space-time, creating a clean, elegant tunnel through the void. The Bio-Titan's gravity lances ripped it open. Kalen felt the transit in his bones, a sickening lurch as reality was torn asunder and then stitched back together in a new configuration. For a disorienting moment, the viewport showed not a starfield, but a chaotic, screaming tapestry of color and light, the raw, untamed energy of the space between spaces. Then, with a jolt that rattled the ship's organic frame, they arrived. The view snapped into focus, and the bridge of the Aethel's ghost was bathed in the brilliant, harsh light of a blue supergiant. Before them, orbiting the star in a delicate, concentric dance, was the Cygnus Spire, the nexus of the Galactic Concordance. It wasn't a single station, but a city of 1,000 glittering towers, linked by filaments of light, a structure of such breathtaking beauty and scale that it seemed more a work of art than a seat of government. It was the symbol of 1,000 years of peace, prosperity, and suffocating, paternalistic control, and the Scythe fleet had arrived to burn it to the ground. There was no warning. No hailing frequencies were opened. No declarations were made. The 50 bio-titans of the Scythe fleet materialized from the churning chaos of their jump, perfectly arranged in a crescent-shaped battle formation, a black, chitinous scythe poised to cut the heart out of the galaxy. For a full 30 seconds, there was a stunned, absolute silence. Kalen watched the tactical display as the Spire's automated defense systems struggled to classify them, their algorithms failing to comprehend these impossible-ish living ships. The Concordance fleet, a collection of elegant, silver vessels that looked more like celestial sculptures than warships, was docked at the Spire, their shields down, their crews likely enjoying the hospitality of the summit. They were a flock of doves facing a pack of wolves. Admiral Thorne stood on his command dais, a statue carved from shadow and resolve. He let the silence stretch, a deliberate, psychological blow. He was allowing them to see their death, to understand the totality of their miscalculation before he unleashed it. "They are launching fighters," a calm voice announced from the tactical station. "Shields are being raised across the Spire. They are hailing us on all emergency frequencies." Thorne ignored the report. His silver eye was fixed on the central spire, the tallest and most ornate of the towers, where the Concordance Council was in session. "Target the Council Spire," he said, his voice a low growl that carried across the bridge. "But do not fire the main lance." He turned his head slightly, his gaze falling on Kalen. "Dr. Vance, prepare to broadcast. Full concordance network penetration, audio and visual. I want them to see the face of the man whose world they destroyed." Kalen's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. The moment of accounting. An aide guided him to a holographic emitter at the front of the bridge. As he stepped into its beam, his image, magnified 1,000 times, would be splashed across every view screen on the spire, every datapad in the docked ships. He felt the cold touch of the emitter's field envelop him. He was the ghost, about to deliver his own eulogy. "Open the channel," Thorn commanded. Kalen looked out at the glittering city in space, a civilization that had deemed his family, his world, to be expendable. The rage that had sustained him for weeks now sharpened into a point of ice-cold clarity. His voice, when it came out, was not the shout of a madman, but the quiet, chillingly calm tone of a scientist presenting his final, irrefutable findings. "My name is Kalen Vance," he began, his image flickering to life across 1,000,000 screens. "I was a xenobotanist on Aethel. You, the members of the Galactic Concordance, sent your condolences for the tragic ecological cascade that claimed my wife, my daughter, and 8 million souls. Today, I am here to return the sentiment." On his mark, the data from the Aethel shard began to broadcast, a wave of irrefutable proof washing over the concordance. The encrypted communiques, the casual discussion of aggressive pruning, the final, damning report on the successful decommissioning of his world. He gave them no time to process it, no moment to formulate a denial. "You called our tragedy a lesson in humility," Kalen continued, his voice rising, resonating with a decade of suppressed fury. "You are about to receive a lesson in consequences. You sowed a seed of death in our garden. We have come to reap the harvest." As he spoke the last word, he looked at Thorn and nodded. "Fire," the Admiral commanded, but it wasn't the gravity lances that fired. From the prows of all 50 bio-titans, a shimmering, golden cloud erupted, a vast, glittering nebula of spores that began to drift towards the Cygnus spire. Kalen's Eater of Eden, adapted, aerosolized, now designed not for soil, but for the delicate, high-tech life support systems of a space station. The Concordance fleet, caught flat-footed, finally reacted. Their elegant ships surged forward, spitting streams of plasma and coherent light at the Scythe fleet. But it was like watching hummingbirds attack boulders. The Bio-Titan's regenerative armor sizzled and smoked where the energy bolt struck, the wounds sealing over almost as quickly as they were made, leaving behind only swirling, iridescent scars. Their response was not to return fire with their own energy weapons. Instead, smaller, faster biovessels, like parasitic remoras, detached from the hulls of the larger titans. They were the Scythe fleet's fighter craft, sleek, insectoid things that moved with an unnatural, fluid agility. They swarmed the Concordant ships, not firing lasers, but latching onto their hulls with diamond-hard talons and injecting corrosive enzymes that ate through the elegant silver plating. It wasn't a battle, it was a slaughter, a brutal, biological dismantling. On the bridge, Kalen watched the tactical display, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. He saw ships vent their atmospheres as the biofighters tore them open. He saw life signs wink out by the thousands. This was the cost of his message, the price of his vengeance. He felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to see Anya Sharma standing beside him. Her face was grim, but her eyes held a fierce, unwavering light. "They are trying to evacuate the Council Spire," she said. "Several high-priority shuttles have launched." "Let them go." Thorn's voice boomed from the command dais. "Let the rats flee the sinking palace. Let them carry the tale of this day to every corner of their crumbling empire. Fear will travel faster than our fleet." Meanwhile, the golden cloud of spores reached the spire, the station's outer defenses. Particle screens and laser grids designed to stop munitions were useless against the microscopic seeds. The spores swirled into the vast network of ventilation shafts and atmospheric processors. For a few minutes, nothing happened. Then, Kalen's biosensors lit up. The spores were germinating. Activated by the nutrient-rich, oxygenated air, they were beginning to grow. Not into flowers, not this time. Kalen had designed this strain for speed and structural demolition. It was a hyper-aggressive form of parasitic mold, its hyphae reinforced with silicate fibers drawn from the station's own superstructure. Within the spire's life support systems, a gray, fibrous cancer was taking root. Lights began to flicker across the 1,000 towers of Cygnus X1. Power fluctuations cascaded through the station's grid as the mold clogged and corroded vital conduits. Internal comms became a cacophony of panicked screams and static as filtration systems failed, pumping not clean air, but choking clouds of gray spores into the sealed environments. Kalen watched a live feed from an internal security camera on the council spire. He saw Concordance delegates in their ornate robes, the architects of Aethel's doom, choking, their faces contorting in terror as the air turned thick and gray. He saw the beautiful, sterile corridors of the spire begin to sprout a carpet of fibrous, pulsating mold. The station wasn't being destroyed by explosions. It was being composted from the inside out. It was a slow, intimate, and deeply personal death, just as he had designed. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted less than an hour. The Concordance fleet was a wreck of shattered, drifting hulls, their crews either dead or dying. The spire, once a beacon of civilization, was now a tomb, its lights extinguished, its heart choked by a creeping gray plague. A profound silence fell over the bridge of the Aethel's ghost. They had done it. They had cut the head off the snake. But as Kalen stared at the dying city, the cold satisfaction he had anticipated was absent. In its place was a vast, echoing emptiness. He had avenged his family. He had held the galaxy's most powerful civilization to account. He had written his scripture in blight and decay. So why did he feel so hollow? His thoughts were interrupted by a priority alert from the communications officer. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission. It's from the surface of Xylos." Thorn frowned. "The Lumina. Their comms should be down." "It's not the Lumina, sir. It's a concordance signal. Black channel. Highest encryption. It's a single word. On repeat." The officer played the audio. A synthesized, emotionless voice filled the bridge, a chilling counterpoint to the carnage outside. "Genesis," it said. "Genesis, Genesis." Kalen felt a spike of ice in his veins. He knew that word. It wasn't a Concordance project name. It was from the deep archives, a theoretical concept he'd stumbled across in his research years ago. A doomsday protocol, a scorched Earth, or rather, scorched galaxy policy. A weapon designed not to win a war, but to end all life, everywhere, ensuring no one could claim victory from the ashes. It was a myth, a paranoid fantasy from a bygone era. Before Thorn could give an order, a new alert flashed on Kalen's biosensor console. A massive energy surge originating from the core of Xylos. It wasn't an explosion. It was something else. The planet, now completely gray and dead on the visual feed, was beginning to pulse with an internal, sickly green light. "What is that?" Sharma breathed, her composure finally breaking. Kalen frantically cross-referenced the energy signature with the Genesis file in his memory. His blood ran cold. "The Bloomfall," he whispered in horror. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a terraforming engine. A delivery system. The pieces clicked into place with sickening speed. The Concordance hadn't just murdered Aethel. They had seeded it. The Eater of Eden hadn't just killed Xylos. It had tilled the soil. The Genesis protocol wasn't a bomb. It was a signal, a command sent to the dormant. Hyper-adaptive genetic code buried in the heart of their bioweapons. A command to initiate the final, terrifying phase of its design. The sickly green light from Xylos intensified. On the main screen, the dead, gray planet cracked open. But it wasn't rock and magma that spilled forth. It was life, a torrent of writhing, virulent, green tendrils, each the size of a continent, erupted from the planet's core, lashing out into space. They were alive, and they were hungry. They had just decapitated the Concordance. They had declared their vengeance to the galaxy, and in doing so, they had just triggered a doomsday device that would not stop until it had consumed everything. They had won the war, only to unleash the apocalypse. The Genesis wave was not silent. It broadcast its arrival on a frequency Kalen had felt before. In the last moments of Aethel, a low, pervasive hum that vibrated in the fillings of his teeth. A sound that bypassed the ear and resonated directly with the primitive, reptilian part of the brain that knows only fear. From the shattered corpse of Xylos, a monstrous green efflorescence of cosmic scale was unfurling. A kraken of sentient, star-devouring flora. The tendrils, vast, semi-translucent ribbons of biological energy and matter, lashed out, their movements not random but purposeful, probing, seeking. The scythe fleet, which seconds before had been the apex predator of the galaxy, was now a swarm of gnats before a tsunami. Panic, a sentiment that had been surgically excised from the crew of the Aethel's Ghost, tried to find purchase on the bridge. Voices rose in alarm as tactical readouts became a cascade of incomprehensible data. The Genesis tendrils were emitting a biodampening field, a wave of energy that wasn't destroying their ships, but unmaking them. On the viewport, Kalen watched in horror as one of the smaller biotitans, the Revenant, drifted too close to a lashing tendril. The ship's crimson, arterial lights flickered and died. The iridescent, chitinous armor lost its luster, turning a dull, matte gray. It was as if the very life force of the ship was being siphoned away. Its complex, grown systems reverting to inert, organic sludge. It wasn't a weapon they could fight. It was entropy, weaponized. "It's a de-evolutionary cascade," Kalen stammered, his mind racing, connecting the horrifying reality with the theoretical data he'd dismissed as myth. The Genesis code targets and unravels complex, spliced DNA. It's designed to dismantle any advanced biological technology. Our ships, they're not just targets. They're the primary fuel source. Admiral Thorne's face was a mask of cold fury, the first crack in his iron composure. His entire philosophy, his life's work, a fleet of living weapons, had just been rendered into the perfect food for the apocalypse. He had built the most exquisite sword imaginable, only to find his enemy was a rust monster. "All ships," Thorn's voice boomed, cutting through the rising fear. "Full power to the gravity lances. Don't target the tendrils, or target the source. Rip the heart out of that dead world." The remaining Bio-Titans responded. Their mandible prows flared open, the captured singularities within their lances spinning to a furious, reality-distorting shriek. 49 beams of pure, focused gravity, blacker than the void itself, converged on the pulsing, green core of what had once been Xylos. The impact was absolute. Space-time screamed, but there was no explosion. The planet did not shatter. Instead, the gravity beams were absorbed. The Genesis wave seemed to feed on the energy, the green light of its core flaring with ecstatic intensity. A new wave of tendrils, larger and faster than the first, erupted from the planet. "It's adapting." Anya Sharma breathed beside Kalen, her face pale. "It's consuming every form of energy we throw at it. Kinetic, biological, gravitational. It's all just food." The truth settled onto the bridge with the weight of a dying star. They could not fight it. They could not flee it, as the tendrils were now moving at near FTL speeds, cutting off escape vectors. They had orchestrated the perfect checkmate, only to have the board itself rise up to devour them. This was the Concordance's final, insane gambit, an ultimate act of spite. If they could not rule the garden, they would let it run wild until it consumed everything, including their conquerors. They hadn't built a doomsday weapon. They had cultivated a god of hunger, and humanity had just rung the dinner bell. It was Kalen who saw the only path, a sliver of an idea so insane, so contrary to every instinct of survival, that it just might work. He stumbled to the command dais, grabbing Thorn's arm, forcing the Admiral to look at him. "Stop fighting it," Kalen yelled, his voice raw with desperation. "You're feeding it. We can't destroy it with force." "Then what do you suggest, Dr. Thorn snarled, his patience gone. "Do we offer it a treaty?" "No," Kalen said, his eyes wild with the fire of a terrible epiphany. "We give it what it truly wants. We give it a new garden, a better one." He pointed a trembling finger, not at the Genesis wave, but back at the dying, spore-choked Cygnus spire. "My weapon, the Eater of Eden. It was designed to pervert and corrupt a biome. The Genesis wave was designed to perfect one. They are two sides of the same coin, creation and decay. What if they aren't enemies? What if they are complements?" The idea was madness, a shot in the absolute dark, but it was the only shot they had. He turned to his bioconsole, his fingers flying across the holographic interface, pulling up the core sequences of his plague and the fragmented data they had on the Genesis wave. He saw a resonance, a horrifying, symbiotic logic. "Admiral," Kalen pleaded, "the Eater of Eden is a fungal agent. Genesis is floral. They are designed to work together. The Concordance didn't just want to kill us. They wanted to replace us, to use our worlds as fertilizer for that." Thorn stared at him, his silver optic whirring, processing the insane calculus of Kalen's theory. Then he looked at his dying fleet, at the unstoppable wave of green death, and he made the choice of a man who had already lost everything. "Give your orders, Doctor," he said, his voice grim. "This is your scripture now. See it to its final verse." Kalen took a deep breath. The fate of everything resting on a xenobotanist's desperate hunch. "Turn the ships around, all remaining power to the engines. We're going back to the spire, and somebody get me a wide-beam broadcast channel. I need to talk to a plague." It was the strangest retreat in the history of warfare. The Scythe fleet, what was left of it, turned tail and fled not away from the Genesis wave, but directly into the path of its expansion, racing towards the blighted Cygnus spire. The Genesis tendrils, as if sensing a purpose, followed a colossal green predator chasing its prey. As they flew, Kalen worked. He couldn't rewrite the Eater of Eden's code, but he could change its broadcast frequency. He isolated the core resonant frequency of the Genesis wave, the tooth-aching hum, and began to modulate the biosignature of his own plague, broadcasting a new signal from the Aethel's ghost. He wasn't sending a command, he was sending an invitation, a call to a mate. "I am introducing a new variable into the equation," he explained to Sharma, who watched him with a kind of terrified reverence. "Genesis wants to build. The Eater wants to consume. I'm telling them they can do both. Together, on the largest, most nutrient-rich compost pile in the known galaxy, the ruins of the Concordance." They reached the spire moments before the first Genesis tendrils. The station was a gray, silent mausoleum, utterly consumed by Kalen's fungal blight. He gave his final command, "Broadcast the signal. Full power." A wave of pure data, shaped by Kalen's desperate gamble, washed over the Cygnus spire, and the universe held its breath. For a moment, nothing happened. The green tendrils of the Genesis wave loomed over the station, ready to devour it and the fleet. Then, something changed. The gray, fibrous mold covering the spire began to pulse with a soft, green light. The Genesis wave paused. Its tendrils ceased their aggressive lashing, and instead began to move with a slow, deliberate grace, reaching for the blighted station not to destroy it, but to embrace it. A tendril touched one of the gray towers. Where it made contact, and a transformation occurred. The necrotic mold did not vanish. It was integrated. The gray fibers intertwined with the vibrant green life of the Genesis wave, creating something new, something stable, beautiful and horrifying in equal measure. A new form of life was being born from the marriage of two apocalypses. A silent, terrifying, symbiotic ecosystem was establishing itself on the grave of the Concordance. The Genesis wave, its primary directive to expand and consume, now placated by this new, perfect garden, became quiescent, its tendrils wrapping the spire in a vast, living cocoon. The hum in Kalen's teeth faded. The scythe fleet, battered and drained, floated in the silent space before the newborn god, their sacrifice accepted. They had survived. On the bridge, a stunned silence gave way to shuddering breaths of relief. They had faced galactic extinction and, through an act of insane biological diplomacy, had brokered a truce. Kalen stumbled back from his console, the strength leaving his limbs, and collapsed into a chair. He looked at the spire, now a colossal, green and gray terrarium, a monument to both his vengeance and his desperate act of creation. Anya Sharma knelt beside him. "You did it, Kalen," she whispered. "You saved us." He shook his head, looking at his trembling hands, the hands that had unleashed one plague and tamed another. "Saved," he echoed, his voice hollow. "Look at what we've become. We answered their atrocity with our own. We became monsters to fight monsters. And in the end, we've birthed something far stranger than either. This isn't a victory. It's a mutation. The war was over. The Concordance was a memory. Humanity had survived, but they were no longer the aggrieved victims. They were the architects of a new and terrifying form of life that now sat at the heart of the galaxy, a constant reminder of the price of their rage. The Aethel's ghost turned its prow away from the spire, leading the remnants of the Scythe fleet back toward the distant, pale light of Sol. Kalen Vance, the man who had lost a world, had remade another. The dust of Aethel had never left him, but now it was mingled with the spores of Xylos and the seeds of Cygnus X1. He had wanted to return a sentiment. He had ended up changing the entire language of life in the galaxy. His vengeance was complete. His scripture was written, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his core, that he and all of humanity would be living in its shadow for 1,000 years to come.